You're listening to the Culture Junkie podcast, where we go beyond the surface of pop culture.
I'm Keith.
And I'm Xandra. Together, we dive into the craft process and passion that drive today's creators. This is the Culture Junkie podcast.
Hey, welcome to the Culture Junkie podcast. Today we have with us Josh Dorfman. Josh is a climate entrepreneur, author, and media personality. He's the CEO and host of Super Cool, a media company covering real-world climate solutions that cut carbon, increase profits, and enhance modern life. Josh was previously the co-founder and CEO of Planted, a carbon-negative building materials manufacturer, which was named to Fast Company's list of the world's most innovative companies in 2024. He has founded two modern design sustainable furniture companies, directed Vine.com, an Amazon e-commerce business specializing in natural and organic products, and served as the CEO of the Collider, America's first innovation center for climate resilience and adaptation. Additionally, Josh was previously known as the Lazy Environmentalist. I like that. A media brand he developed into an award-winning television series on Sundance Channel, a daily radio show on Sirius XM, and two popular books. His work has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Forbes, TechCrunch, Fast Company, and Reuters, and now he's on the Culture Junkie podcast. Josh has also made regular appearances on national television and radio programs, including Morning Joe, Fox and Friends, and NPR's All Things Considered. And Josh is the only guest ever to ride a bike onto the Martha Stewart set. Josh, welcome to the Culture Junkie podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, listen, you've been working at the intersection of sustainability and media for a long time. What originally pulled you into climate work?
I lived in China in the 90s, and I was thinking about a career in diplomacy, maybe working for the Foreign Service. So I wanted to go to China. I learned the language. I was teaching on a university, and I got a part-time job, which then became a full-time job, working for a manufacturer of bicycle locks. So I became very focused on the fact that China had 1 billion people at the time riding bikes. And there were no EVs. There's none of the technology that we see today. This was 30 years ago, very much a developing country. In my second year, we opened our third factory in southern China. I was traveling with the owner of that factory, a Chinese businessman, to this restaurant where we were going to celebrate the deal, toast in what they call baijiu. They're very, very potent alcohol, almost like grain alcohol. So we were going to have a little baijiu, a little snake blood. It was like a specialty restaurant. But before we went in, the owner said to me, Josh, look, my Mercedes is the biggest Mercedes in this parking lot of like all the Mercedes. And I looked around, I was like, oh my God, it's 1997, communist China. And everyone has a Mercedes here because there was a lot of southern Hong Kong money spilling into southern China. But I thought in that moment, you know what? I've been here now. I'm in my second year. I've seen in that time highways literally get built, things you would never see in the West, in Canada or America in just an unbelievable short amount of time. Bridges, tunnels, all of this infrastructure going in to take a country with 1 billion people riding bikes and turn it into a country with 1 billion people driving cars. And I thought in that moment, I don't know how that math pencils on many fronts from a natural resources point of view and increasingly from a climate change, global warming point of view. When you'll have that many more car drivers on the planet, that's when I decided that one day, well, I shouldn't say that. That was my moment where I was kind of opened to the potential challenges of climate change. It took me a while to figure out what I might do about that and what role I might play in solutions, but that's where it started.
So, Josh, was there a specific moment where this went from like an interest to a mission?
Yeah, I would say so. So in the early 2000s, as I'd had this really profound experience in China, was thinking a lot about the future economy. How do we scale or how do we raise up our standards of living, both in the US, other countries, China, developing world, in a way that's aligned with nature's systems, capabilities to sustain this type of growth? You know, I got activated, but I would say I got activated first as like with a lot of activist energy, meaning I was very upset. I tended to walk around scolding people who were closest to me, my loved ones, telling them how terrible they were for leaving the lights on and, behaviors that certainly I hadn't paid attention to all of my life. And it just got to the point where I remember it was one Thanksgiving, I was home, and I remember my younger brother saying, "Great, here he comes again, my older brother, to make me feel bad about myself." And I thought, you know what? I don't want to be that guy. I'm not happy and I'm not affecting change. I'm not really getting anybody to change their behavior. What if there were another way? And it wasn't just immediately like I had the insight. I had to go through a number of different experiences. I went into a PhD program at George Washington University, focused on politics, environment, China. I just was in all these places thinking, thinking, thinking. And eventually I realized in 2004 that, I thought to myself, you know what? I live in a consumer culture. I live in a consumer economy. 2/3 of America's GDP is consumer spending. What if I could move that consumer spending in a more sustainable direction? And the lever that I would use to try to do that would be design, style. What if I could find really wonderful products made of eco friendly materials? Maybe they were reclaimed wood or recycled plastic or responsibly harvested FSC certified wood, you name it, didn't matter what it could be. Reclaimed billboards, who knew? But if I could find products that had this real aesthetic to them, then maybe I could sell products to people based on their aesthetic and design preferences and not have to go market it as an eco friendly solution. And maybe I could slip the eco-friendly part kind of below the radar because people would just have it in a package that they actually were delighted about. That could be a pair of jeans, that could be a couch. It didn't really matter to me, but that was my evolution. That was the moment where I thought, yeah, I think this is a better way to go.
So this separates it from, just from being something just for the climate conscious. Regular people would be interested in your products, and the climate, like you said, you can slip that in as, under the radar there as, look, also, you're being climate conscious. So, you focused a lot on that. Do you think the movement is adjusting to your methodology?
Well, I would say in certain areas, yes. Think so the bulk of my career, probably the first decade, a little bit more of that of my career working in sustainability was very consumer focused. As you mentioned, I eventually had this TV show, radio show called The Lazy Environmentalist. So I was really trying to meet Americans where they were and say, look, here's all these wonderful solutions that are easy to fit into your life. You don't have to sacrifice, you don't have to change what you do. Here's an amazing low flow shower head. You're going to get incredible water pressure. It will just help you use less water while you're in the shower and less heat to heat that water. What I've found from a consumer perspective is that, you know, I've seen brands come and go. I've seen some really wonderful brands. I've seen more sophistication in how a number of sustainable brands market themselves, the type of product they put in the market. But I haven't really seen that consumer market grow. I think the relatively probably proportionally the same number of people who wanted to shop their values and actually did it 2 decades ago is probably about the same right now. Where I see a dramatic shift is in solutions designed for other businesses, more in this business to business realm. And so kind of like Planted, the company that we started, where we said, you know what if we could identify a biomass, something that could grow 10 times faster than trees. Trees are awesome at pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. Everyone knows that they're a really good climate solution because through photosynthesis, as they grow, they're absorbing carbon. What if we could find something that did that 10 times faster? So we set out to do that, being me and two amazing engineers from SpaceX. And we tried bamboo, we tried industrial hemp, we tried all sorts of things. And eventually we found this perennial grass that actually does it. And you can harvest it every year. And now with the SpaceX team, we built a factory with no smokestack to effectively take that grass, turn it into building materials, and then lock away the carbon from the atmosphere inside the walls of new homes. And I see hundreds, if not thousands, of companies like that that are scaled up, successful today, cutting carbon, helping their customers either make more money or save money, and improving our quality of life in the process.
Okay. So All that being said, do you think the climate movement has like a messaging problem? Because it doesn't seem to be any downside when I hear you speak with that kind of enthusiasm. I'm into it, let's get the low flow shower head. But there still seems to be, in my mind anyway, there seems to be some resistance to to being climate friendly and thinking about climate change.
Well, I think you're right. In some respects, I think you can hardly call it even a movement. A movement implies movement. And I think that our communication hurdles, challenges, slow down virtually all movement. I think that you can look at research coming out of academia. You can look at reports put out from the United Nations Communication Department in conjunction with places like Yale that has been doing a lot of environmental communication research for many years. And it will all say the same thing. If you want to engage more people in a conversation around climate and move them to action, what we really need to do is focus less on the problem, less communication about what's wrong, and more communication about solutions. The thing is, if you listen to the leaders of the United Nations, they don't take their own advice. They're always out there being like, oh my God, this is like the sky's falling. And it is, right? So it's like, it's not that it's not, but they don't take their own advice. And so, yeah, I think there's a huge problem with how, people who work in climate generally communicate about what the opportunity is. What I have seen, look, but here's the flip side of that. If you look at the last 2 years, 2024 and 2025, 2024 was the first year that clean energy investment globally surpassed $2 trillion. In 2025, despite all the turmoil going on, it hit $2.3 trillion. It doubled investment in fossil fuels. Fossil fuels have never even come close to $2 trillion in a year. And so this is happening on a global scale. And it's happening because the economics line up also with a lot of national security concerns, which we see right now in this moment while there is a war underway in the Middle East. And you have I'm not sure if he's the president or prime minister, but the leader of the government in South Korea, I just saw it this morning, gave a speech saying we need to move as fast as possible to renewables because this is a national security crisis for us, that we are still reliant on importing fossil fuels. So there are lots of reasons why this is actually, this is the biggest driver of the global economy right now is clean energy investment. Everyone wants to talk about AI. $400 billion was invested in AI, at least in America in 2024. That's massive. That's not even 25% of what was globally spent on moving us to a low carbon future. I think that there's two different things here. There's like a huge climate communication fail, and yet there's this huge success in another part of where solutions are actually getting implemented because the value proposition is so strong.
So are consumers going to drive this, or is it going to be corporate led, this change that's eventually going to come? What do you think?
Consumers are definitely not driving this. Consumers have had an opportunity to drive this for 2 decades, and they're not going to drive it. But it doesn't really matter. Built a career trying to help consumers make more sustainable choices, and I've come to the conclusion that it really doesn't matter how much consumers actually try to do the right thing. You can use a reusable water bottle if you want to. The impact is really pretty marginal if you do. It's actually, I've heard some younger activists talk about the fact that the corporate world has really done a very good job from a communication standpoint of shifting the responsibility for disposable Coca-Cola bottles or whatever onto consumers, that like it's their fault. When in fact, that was actually a very conscious shift to change law that said that those who produce the Coca-Cola bottles are no longer responsible, right? Like they lobbied to absolve themselves. So, but what I do think is going to happen is that increasingly what will be available to consumers. So if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, you know, store where you're going to buy the stuff for your house, your dishwasher, your stove, whatever it's going to be. Increasingly, those choices are all going to be things that plug in. You will not have natural gas boilers anymore. You will not have these technologies that rely on fossil fuels because they're not nearly as good. And the stuff
Right.
that plugs in that helps you electrify your life is getting cheaper and more innovative and looks cool and is stylish and are just simply the things that we're going to want. So that's half the equation. The equation is plug everything into the grid and then run the grid on renewables. And solar, wind, certainly solar in many parts of the world today, when combined with batteries for storage, is the cheapest form of energy you can have. I mean, it's like this is happening so fast, but we're still so early in the transition that, I think give another decade and people will finally realize, whoa, the future is here in ways that are delightful to us.
No, that's really gratifying to hear you say that because, climate change is, as far as I'm concerned, it should be at top of mind. But you know what? Back to the behavioral change. You've worked in media, so obviously you're a storyteller, right? So how has the story changed in and around climate change in the last 10 years where you've been doing this? Not just 10 years, over the course of your career.
I think the reason why I view today as a different moment in the trajectory of climate solutions, let's put it that way, is because we're living in a moment where there are hundreds of climate technology companies who are scaling. Companies, there's a bunch of them in Canada, there's a bunch of them in Toronto. I was just talking to Stan Reitzma, who's the CEO of a company called Geosource that drills the geothermal boreholes hundreds of feet below buildings in downtown Toronto. I've talked with this guy, Sam Ramadori, who is the CEO of a company called Brainbox in Montreal that takes a cloud based AI solution, puts it in your building, and the AI knows the angle of the sun, it knows the wind speed around the building, it knows the carbon intensity of the grid, meaning how much renewables are on it at any given moment, knows the cost of energy, and it knows 6 hours from now with 90% plus certainty, who's going to be occupying a floor of a big giant office building. So it can gradually heat that space or gradually cool that space, not have to spike energy, to turn on the AC and then, or heat and crank it up at one time, which is how you get a lot of cost and a lot of carbon. But they save building owners up to 25% on their HVAC cost, which is the biggest energy cost in a building, and up to 40% on their carbon. They're in 17,000 buildings and they got acquired by Train Technologies. Like, oh, it's coming out of Canada. It's awesome, right? And so what all these companies understand and what Sam Ramadori of Brainbox said to me when I asked him, like, Sam, how do you sell this? Who's excited about it? Is it the CFO? Is it the plant manager? And he's like, well, Josh, the first thing you have to understand, and because people really get wrong, is they think, okay, your Brainbox AI, you got this cool AI, you're going to go talk about AI. He's like, I can promise you, no executive, no plant manager, no operations director wakes up in the morning and thinks, you know what I need more of today in my buildings? I really need to get more AI. Nobody thinks that way, right? But they do think, man, I would really like to cut my cost. I'd like to way to be able to have more insight into my machines, maybe do some predictive maintenance, understand where I'm going to have issues. All of the things that we can provide through Brainbox AI, that's what we sell. So where I'm going with this is what I see is that companies that are really moving the needle, taking market share, changing markets, they've all realized that they have to talk. These are climate companies now. They have to talk less about their technology, less about the kilowatt hours. They have to talk less about their mission to save the planet, pull that back, talk more about how their solution helps solve real pain for their customers. What are the benefits? What are the outcomes that you're going to get? And then once that solution is in place, once Brainbox is in a building and carbon's going down and costs are going down, then everybody wants to shout their climate commitment from the rooftop, right? Because the thing actually works. But no one wants to buy a climate solution. They want to buy something that helps their business. That's what's different today is that founders, CEOs, founding teams have figured out that that's the shift they have to make. And every company that's scaling has, as one way or another, learned to actually change how they communicate to talk about what's in it for you, the customer, not what's in it for me, for my tech, or what's in it for the planet.
And I find it terribly frustrating today still that when I talk about climate change, people go, what are you talking about? The weather's the same. People still conflate weather and climate. If there's one climate myth or misconception that you could instantly get rid of, what would it be?
Well, that's a tough one. It's tough to argue the weather versus climate. It's tough to, I also think the climate, again, I'm hesitant to call it a movement, but I would say the climate community, let's say, doesn't do themselves a great service when here in the US, we talk about climate change in terms of degrees centigrade. Americans barely know what Fahrenheit is, and we're running around being like, "Oh no, we can't let it like increase 1.5 degrees Celsius," right? And it's like, okay, I don't know what that is. Is that a lot? Is that a little? Like, what even is Celsius? I know I learned about that in like fourth grade. There's some
So,
calculation, but like I don't know. So it's like, what language are you trying to speak to people in where they actually can even understand in the first place? And so that mix up between weather and short-term weather versus long-term patterns in a climate, in my mind, that's intentional. Nobody's really that dumb. But I think that people are intentionally dumb because they think it's kind of funny. They also, it's like, oh, I'm just going to be intentionally stupid because I think it's funny to pretend like that climate means weather and it's cold today. So how can the planet be changing? And where I'm going with that is, to me, you cannot stoop to that level and have a conversation on that like level of like low intelligence and change somebody's mind. It's just never going to happen. The only thing that I think you can do is kind of largely ignore it and be like, "Hey, let me give you a test drive in my Tesla. This thing goes, and then they just go in and you're like, yeah, watch this thing go 0 to 60 now in, under 3 seconds. And then they're like, whoa, I want one of these. And you're like, yeah, okay, this thing solves climate change, but I don't care whether you believe in climate change or not. Just get the solution.
so do you think we're moving fast enough towards a positive outcome, or is it still dragging?
That is the greatest question. I mean, that is the quintessential question. I was talking with a journalist for Bloomberg, a guy, Eric Roston, a number of years ago. And what he said to me, of course, it stayed with me. He said, when you think about the clean energy transition, this is moving so fast. This is the greatest, moment of innovation truly in human history of transformation. Like what is happening, how the world's going to change, how we're going to decarbonize and the pace we're doing it. Nothing like this has ever happened before. The question is, given the magnitude of the climate challenge, just like you're asking, is it going fast enough to avert the worst impacts of climate change? And that is still an unknown. My view is, who cares? Because the solutions that solve climate change, to me, at least the ones that I focus on, the ones that I see scaling, just simply make life better. You can look really on any dimension. I'll give you an example. If you're the mayor or if you're working in policy for a city and you were thinking, you know what, we need to put a plan in place to raise our quality of life in this city, to raise the quality of life for citizens. What would you do? You'd probably put in some pedestrianized zones for, more walking. You'd probably put in some really awesome protected bike lanes. You'd probably try to, improve your public transit and make public transit far more accessible. Probably put in more green space, more parks. You'd probably think about, how do we bring resources closer to people so a city is more convenient? That's kind of like the 15-minute city. All of those things would actually increase the quality of life for citizens. The byproduct of that is you cut carbon, right? Like, so I just think on any dimension, it doesn't really matter if we're going to go fast enough or not. It just makes sense if we want to build a future that is more prosperous and has a higher quality of life attached to it than the way we live today. You just do this stuff.
So then is net zero a real solution? Or is that just a narrative?
Is net zero a real? I like that question. Is it a real solution? I have no idea. I don't know if net zero is like net zero to me is just such a dumb, um, again, like academic term that somehow found its way into the mainstream. Net zero. Nobody even knows what net zero means.
Listen, net
Like,
zero
like
is you
I
might
don't
as
even
well
know exactly what it means.
you might as well say woke, right? It means whatever the person wants it to mean. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily mean one thing specifically. But
Yeah.
I think people hold it up as, and then, something like, we need to be net zero, and then it's impossible to get. So then the naysayers can go, oh, well, you see, what are you doing? You're not doing anything.
Well, I mean, I would say, okay, if I think about the future, are we going to be net zero? All right.
Oh,
Well, so let's just say net zero means, are we going to solve climate change? Because I guess it's maybe like a shorthand, like, are we going to eliminate fossil fuels? Right? Maybe that. Are we going to eliminate fossil fuels? In my view, I think we are going to eliminate fossil fuels, and I think that if you look at the International Energy Association (IEA), every year for forever. They've done their forward-looking projections of what would be the uptake for solar, what would be the uptake for wind, the forecasts out. They're always wrong. Sometimes by like an order of magnitude wrong, because solar adoption is happening so much faster than they predict. And even when they're trying to be aggressive, they're wrong, because solar still rolls out faster than anyone can imagine. And when you look at solar, just as one example, over the last 5 decades, the price since the first solar panel became commercialized, the price of solar has dropped by 99%. And if you and now it's on a learning curve where when you double production by 20, I think this is what it is. When you double production, the cost drops by 27%. And it just like it, we've seen this curve for 5 decades. If you project that out for another decade, which no one's willing to do, and the reason they're not willing to do it is because when you project that curve that we've been on just for another decade, solar becomes so insanely cheap that everything in the world suddenly starts to look very different. Desalination becomes abundantly possible, right? And the more you do desalination and the more you're building more solar panels, then you're going to drive the cost even lower. And so we're just moving to a world that is going to feel very different than it does today. You can't really see it in America today. And a lot of the solutions, I think how we started this conversation, a lot of these really incredible companies and solutions that are having really amazing success, their stories are hidden because the mainstream media still doesn't get it and would rather sell you on doom and gloom anyway, because that's what people tend to read. And the tech media wants to tell you about startups that just raised huge rounds of money, even though their solution might never come to market, right? Like small nuclear reactors, like everyone wants to talk about small nuclear reactors, so that's at least a decade away.
or
Nobody
data
talks
centers in
about
space.
or data centers in space. Yeah, right. Exactly. It's all distraction from the fact that all these solutions are actually here today, improving quality of life, cutting carbon, boosting profits, or cutting costs. You can talk to CEOs. I've talked to mayors of a whole range of different cities, from like Bristol in the UK, who's done some really cool stuff around. I mean, the UK has like the leakiest homes in the developed world. It's insane. So like trying
Sure.
to like solve that problem with more energy efficiency, to the mayor of Barranquilla in Colombia, to the mayor of Quito in Ecuador. And you still hear the same conversation. Like the mayor of Barranquilla, he convinced his constituents to plant trees along routes where like it was so hot that children were passing out on the way to school. The way he convinced people to do it, he was like, look, in London, on streets where trees are intentionally planted, property values of those homes go up by 10%, which means that's 10% more property tax revenue for the city. We're going to have a massive ROI on tree planting, and the kids aren't going to pass out on their way to school. How can you say no to that? And no one could, right? So they actually get more trees, they get a more habitable, place to live, and they're putting in place a solution that makes life better. So this is everywhere. It's not even like a profit, like I think the other thing with the climate, or I'll call it a movement,
Mhm.
that they get up in arms about is like somehow like profit is somehow like I don't know,
Sacred.
sort of a ploy of Satan. Like if you're trying to make money, you are like connected with, like devil worshiping. And it's like, it's just a tool. Like profit is just a tool to try and incentivize certain behaviors. And a lot of those behaviors that are being incentivized actually do a lot of good.
Yeah, it's funny. They're always trying to portray money as being so sordid, and you should just rather get advice than money. But one of the things that struck me, what you said, is you feel that solar is the linchpin for moving this forward. Eh?
It's very much the linchpin. Solar, and then batteries connected to solar so that you actually have a way to store that energy. You don't just have to use it while the sun's out. Batteries are on a similar learning curve where as their manufacturing output increases, their costs are being cut dramatically. And so that combination now of solar and batteries in many, many parts of the world is already the most cost effective energy source of anything that countries can deploy. So this to me, there's no question. I was just reading today how, AI data centers. So remove the fact of whether you want them or don't want them. I mean, they're here. We're gonna have more of them. It's coming. AI data centers have a very hard problem getting energy. They have to get in line to connect to the grid. Certainly in America, that's a very big challenge. Data centers are increasingly looking at solar, not in the way that like Google does it, where Google's like, oh yeah, we just, paid for that 200 megawatt solar facility. That's going to come online somewhere in Texas and plug into the grid. And then we'll set up our factory that uses 200 megawatts and they kind of offset each other. We don't actually use that solar, but we paid for it. And so like we're clean. That's and good. That's great. They're incentivizing a lot more solar. But what we're going to increasingly see is Google being like, you know what? We're actually going to put that solar all around our own data center and run our data center on solar and batteries so that we don't have to wait forever to plug into the grid because it's just taking too long. And solar and batteries are going to be a huge part. Like you're not even going to be able to have an AI future, honestly, without solar and batteries. I think a lot of people don't want to admit that, but that is just fundamentally the case when you look at those cost curves and the way that you can deploy energy fast. It's the other thing. It's like far easier to deploy solar and batteries than it is to set up a natural gas turbine. I was talking to someone on the board of Siemens Energy last year, and he was like, if you want a natural gas turbine, just get in line because you can't get one until like 2029. Like we're sold out. And it's like it's just not possible. And so yeah, I'm very bullish, I would say, on solar.
So if we talked about this 10 years from now, would you say 20% of the population of the United States would have a solar battery pack in their garage running their house, or at least being backup?
Well, I would say guaranteed 20% of US homes will have a battery, and that battery will be connected to the grid. And when solar and wind and geothermal are running on connected to the grid at utility scale, and people aren't home during the day, those batteries will be charging up from a grid that has a lot more renewable energy on it, right? And that will also be moments because there's so much available energy when energy will be cheap. So it will be the good time to like power up your battery on cheaper, clean energy. And then at night, when everybody comes home, instead of buying expensive grid power, because now everybody's home and so energy costs are going up, you can use your own battery. Or if there are moments when, let's say, it gets really hot and so energy is going to spike because everyone's cranking up the AC, then you will have the option with your utility to sell the energy you've stored in your grid, in your battery, back to the grid,
Good.
right? And it's guaranteed that's going to happen. That we're going to move to a more distributed energy grid, but whether there will be solar on people's roofs, I'm really not sure because I'm not sure that will be the best way to actually deploy solar versus massive utility scale solar that we're seeing today, or community solar where solar goes into a community and people who can't actually either afford to put it on their own roof or the roof isn't really appropriate can all like take a share in a what would be a community solar almost grid and buy into that energy, which could lower their costs. There's different models. Solar's going to be everywhere. I'm just not sure that the end game is it's on everyone's roof.
Listen, Josh, it's been great speaking to you. I'd love to hear your perspective. Just tell me something, some quick couple of questions before we bugger off here. What's one habit that you wish everyone would adopt tomorrow that would move us towards this smaller carbon footprint, so to speak?
Well, I don't get paid to say this. I just think that it's 100% true. There's a bank called Climate First Bank that different from probably where your listeners are and most people bank. Climate First Bank takes the deposits and checking and savings accounts and loans that money out toward clean energy projects,
Oh,
right? Toward projects that have a and or have a different socioeconomic mission. Then nearly every mainstream bank, maybe just flat out every mainstream bank that is still underwriting fossil fuels. So you can be living the greenest life you want, right? You can be like all organic, everything reusable. But if you're banking with a mainstream bank, it's pretty much guaranteed that your funds are helping to underwrite investments into energy sources that you're not happy about. So I think everyone has an opportunity to do some research and move their cash so that they still go about their life like lazy environmentalists doing whatever they want, but their money is being, put to good use aligned with their values.
That's amazing. I have to look into that. So now tell me, what's one thing that people worry about that they shouldn't?
One thing they worry about that they shouldn't. Um, I would say that's probably whether the Giants are going to be Super Bowl contenders next
And they
football
can
season.
relax about the Giants. The Giants are going nowhere. So
Yeah.
from Toronto, I can tell you that.
Yeah, so don't worry about that. That's probably not going to happen. You have to get your hopes up. You don't have to worry about it. On the climate front, I mean, I know I can come off and sound a little bit, I don't know, Pollyannish, but definitely cavalier in some of the way that I talk about what's coming or what's happening. It is certainly how I feel. I think that what you shouldn't worry about is what shouldn't you worry about? I don't know. I don't really worry about a lot. When it comes to what we should be doing. Don't worry about. Here's what you shouldn't worry about.
All right.
There's a lot of reasons to worry about this current administration. I would say here in the states,
Oof.
but the you know when it comes to the pullback that's happened in clean energy, it is worrisome. But that is always cyclical. And so when the next administration comes in, or even before that, we will see states increasingly be stepping up, local municipalities to figure out more incentives, more ways to get to the clean energy future. So these are the things that I think about that can cause me to worry. But then I remind myself, right, like as dire as sometimes things seem, we've sort of seen this at the federal level before, and progress is still going to happen.
Yeah, listen, Josh Dorfman, thank you for being on our show today. It's been a pleasure talking to you and food for thought. A lot of stuff of what you said is going to ring true with a lot of people, but of course the naysayers are going to want to refute. But at least we sparked a discussion. Anyway, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.